Looking at the participants list of today, with more than 200 registrations, I saw many familiar names of RSB members and partners, but also new names joining us today. And we are truly delighted to welcome you here today and so excited to share with you what RSB is doing to support the aviation sector and its goals to reach carbon neutrality. In fact, when I first met with the RSB team to think about what we want to present here today, we realized that there are so many activities that we want to talk about and share with you. So it was really hard to fit them all in the agenda of this webinar today. Looking at the certification standards and recognition achieved under ICAO CORSIA, our new activities like the RSB Book and Claim system and the Eco Transport Program, but also additional engagement opportunities that we will present today around SAF policy and Power to X. The RSB is set to maximize the impact on the path of our sustainability mission. Together with our members and partners, we embarked on a mission to mitigate climate change by transitioning into a bio-based and circular economy. And this is now more urgent than ever before. The climate crisis challenging the global society to advance solutions quickly, with devastating consequences of climate change happening quicker than we ever feared before. With weather extremes that are now happening in the front of our eyes, the time for collective action is really now. And with the global response to the pandemic, we have really gained experience on how to address a global emergency. And now we have to translate this learning into actions to mitigate climate change on an even more threatening global emergency. Our members are working on solutions already, like New Seed working with Carinata to sequester more carbon in the ground, or LanzaTech working on solutions to recycle carbon emissions and give carbon a second life, so to say. And together, our members have adopted the 12 sustainability principles that you see on the slide here. They're underpinned by criteria and auditor guidance, and build the global best practice on how to mitigate sustainability risks effectively across the entire supply chain. And the only way how to do the transition of the economy is really to adhere to such a robust set of sustainability criteria to avoid the unintended effects that such a transition could bring. Our membership community includes a broad range of stakeholders, and we are really thrilled to welcome our newest member, Heineken, to our membership group. The range of our stakeholders is what makes the RSB so unique. We all know that the challenge to transition our economy is multifaceted, and so needs to be the solution. When developing solutions, they need to work across sectors, need to be backed by science, supported by the civil society. And only in the RSB stakeholders come together from aviation, shipping, feedstock, fuel, material producers, also environmental and social organizations, to discuss and agree on global best practices to ensure sustainability across the supply chain to really help transition our economy. This is how we're working in practice. Members are organized in our 5 chambers, and they're electing delegates who elect then the board of directors. This is also why the RSB standards are so robust and broadly supported, because we involve all our stakeholders in standard setting, ensure a balanced representation of interest and transparent processes. There is no other sustainability standard relevant for this transformation of the economy that applies a multi-stakeholder approach as robust as the RSB. We have 3 main areas of work. We operate a certification system where certification bodies are recognized to apply the RSB standard and certifying operators across the entire supply chain from feedstock production to the final product. The certified operators can then use on-product RSB claims. And because our sustainability approach is so holistic, it is much more than just a license to trade. It is effectively reducing sustainability risks through the application of our criteria. And this is also why our standard is more and more used in early project development. When you implement sustainability criteria early on, for example, include in decisions on feedstock supply, you ensure the continued support by your stakeholders. Also, RSB supports compliance with the new due diligence regulation, access to sustainable finance mechanisms. We're bringing stakeholders together, ensuring that the RSB standard also in future is relevant and covers new technologies. And this is, for example, why we are about to set up a new working group on Power-to-X technologies and developing new practices on the topic. Also, there will be new opportunities to collaborate on SAF policy, to work together, ensuring that sustainability is embedded in sustainability mandates around the world, and working on projects and programs. And this activity of the RSB, in fact, is becoming more and more important, and we are gaining more and more experience in driving national and regional SAF road mapping processes that ensure then the impact across entire jurisdictions. This is, for example, in Ethiopia, or also our inputs in Brazil. So what we are doing is that we convene regional stakeholder bodies to develop regional SAF roadmaps, conducting with our partners and WWF and IASA regional feedstock assessments that incorporate the sustainability criteria of the RSB standard in assessments for regional feedstock availability. And this is to already direct investment to feedstocks that mitigate sustainability risks effectively, and incorporating the sustainability in those feedstock availability assessments reduces then the effort of achieving sustainability in the supply chains later on. We're also building regional capacity to help stakeholders regionally to understand sustainability best practices and how they apply regional. Our participation then also in projects like H2020 projects, and we are open to join further consortia because we see how we achieve impact there. For example, in the H2020 project called Alight, where we are developing together with our partners the Sustainable Airport of the Future, or Flight, a consortium that is looking to build an ATJ facility in Europe, and RSB's participation to advise the consortium in selecting the most sustainable feedstock options. And this is why our partners select to work with the RSB. We have a widespread recognition as the best-in-class standard. And with many third-party reviewers who have found the RSB to be the strongest and most robust of its kind. As you know, we are formally recognized by ICAO under CORSIA and working on the ongoing recognition by the EU for RED2. In fact, they have already assessed us as compliant with the new RED2 criteria, which is also a great success for the entire team that we are really proud of. As you see, we are a truly global organization with certifications, partners, and members around the world. And looking at the list of solutions and activities that we are offering for the aviation industry, you see that we have added 2 new solutions, the Book and Claim and the Eco Transport Program. And I would like to talk to both of them in the next slide. So the Book and Claim solution that we are currently developing is to address the challenge of limited SAF supply that is available only in a few locations, leading to high costs and emissions to transport the SAF to its customers. So the idea of the RSB Book and Claim solution is to allow to decouple the environmental benefit from the SAF to supply customers without the possibility of a physical connection. And RSB here provides a robust solution as we are working on developing a book and claim system that allows SAF suppliers to register SAF volumes in a RSB registry and transfer the associated benefits to airlines. And then airlines can use the SAF, for example, for corporate customers to help them reduce their Scope 3 emissions. And now I have the pleasure to announce a new strategic collaboration with RBP to pilot the RSB Book and Claim system. The pilot includes the first certification based on the RSB Book and Claim manual that we have developed, which will allow RBP as certified operator to register SAF volumes in the RSB Book and Claim registry and offers their clients to issue retirement certificates. And as a result of this pilot, we will develop specifications that can be applied for the development of a market scale registry system. And in parallel, we will conduct stakeholder consultations to talk through a couple of very important topics, also on the alignment of the system with other methodologies and initiatives, like, for example, the SBTI. And today we also have David Mosley from BP here with us, and he will be available later on in the Q&A session to respond to any questions that you, as Hannah mentioned, can put in the chat box for discussion later on. The second component that we are developing in combination with the Book and Claim is the RSB Eco Transport Program. And while the Book and Claim is a supply chain solution, the Eco Transport Program is an offer for transport companies to get a credible third-party RSB certification for their sourcing of fuels that are in compliance with the strong sustainability criteria of the RSB. So the RSB Eco Transport Program goes beyond the greenhouse gas emission reduction to offer assurance on the key customer concerns around deforestation, food security, labor rights, and supply chains. For both new activities, we are conducting a pilot period to work on the first certifications. Next slide, please. So in the first quarters in 2021, we have developed and revised the RSB Book and Claim manual. We have set up the requirements for the Eco Transport Program so that both can be tested in a pilot. And we have consulted a couple of expert stakeholders on the topic. Now, going forward, we will now conduct the first pilot certifications. And you should see on your screen now popping up a polling asking you a couple of questions to ask for your interest in participate in those either pilots or in the stakeholder consultations. And as you see here on the slides, the pilot will run through this year and the first quarter next year. And then in the next year, the idea is that we can launch to the market a fully fledged registry and also the finalized certification requirements following the integration of the lessons learned and comments from the stakeholder consultation in both documents. So they're both really very, very exciting programs that we are currently working on, and hope that you also find them useful and have interest to work with us on those. And before I wrap up with the introduction, I want to take this opportunity to invite you all to the RSB Annual Conference 2021. It will take place from the 15th to the 18th of November in a virtual format. It will be a very, very engaging meetings. It will have parallel fuel and material streams. It will have sessions that are exclusive for our members. It will have sessions on our new SAF policy working group. We will share outcomes of our pilots and the stakeholder consultations on the Book and Claim and the Eco Transport Program. And also we will work with you to further shape the RSB best-in-class standards. And there will also be more opportunities for collaboration around projects to see how we can even bring even better together the RSB stakeholders, RSB members for collective action. And you will see now in the chat box the link to register for the conference. So I hope that I will see you all there in November. And with that, I have the pleasure to hand over to our guest today, Pedro Perez Cabezas from the Environmental Defense Fund, who is the Director for Sustainable International Transport and the lead senior economist on the climate program. So welcome, Pedro, to this webinar. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elena. It's such a pleasure to be here and an honor to be invited to speak to such an amazing group of participants today. Many of them, as you mentioned before, people we have been crossing over, crossing paths over the last many years. And it's such a pleasure to be here with so many friends. So thank you so much, Elena, and congratulations. But first of all, I think that the launch of this Eco Transport Program and the RSB Book and Claim manual and system, it is a major contribution, and it's badly needed contribution. It's one of the things that I wanted to highlight in my brief talk today. But since you brought it up, as you just announced it, I think it's worth highlighting the importance of that contribution that RSB is making on that. It shows evidence of how important the role RSB has been playing since a long time ago, at least since ICAO got embarked in the, ICAO International Civil Aviation Organization. I try not to use acronyms. I'm sorry about that. Since we all got engaged in that process to establish this sustainability framework. But I just want to highlight two important things: is that this effort you guys are doing, it is critical for advancing and shaping the policy that is emerging now at full strength and speed on both sides of the Atlantic and in other jurisdictions, but mostly in the United States and the European Union. So, kudos for that initiative, and I'm confident that that's going to shape the process. But it's also, it's not only critical for that, but it's also instrumental for engaging corporate customers and other end users who will have the privilege to be able to claim that they are making a contribution in the fight against climate change. And I give you just a quick example for the benefit of everybody. I purchased my first 4 liters of SAF last June in Madrid, and honestly, I have no idea what I purchased, and I wish it was certified by RSB, so I had confidence that the fuel meets, is in compliance with all the criteria and principles for all the things that I care about, and that cover the full spectrum of all the areas that matter: social, economic, and of course environmental. I have no idea what I purchased. I don't know what is the real contribution. That's why these kind of efforts and contributions by RSB are so critical. But before I derail too much my my contribution today, I just want to I just want to share with enthusiasm everything that I've been going through with RSB since I got engaged in this in the field of sustainable aviation fuels back in 2014, that's when ICAO took the bold and great decision to actually allow for sustainable aviation fuels to count towards in the context of CORSIA, the offsetting and emission reduction international mechanism from ICAO to reduce the contribution of the sector and fight against climate change. So as you all know, airlines have two options to contribute to that. One is to use through the use of offsets, and the other option is to meet the compliance obligations is through the use of emissions reductions from the use of SAF. Setting up that framework that began, all that process began in 2014, and kind of like a first huge milestone was at the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021 when the system became operational, which is an outstanding milestone. We're still working and refining on many different elements, but being able today to say that we have a system that is up and running, that is operational, that the reporting, that everything works, it is outstanding. And I think that that goes with the effort of many stakeholders, but I think that the the contribution from RSB has been critical. And there's a good reason for that, because one of the premises that we took when we began this process back in 2014 was to try to build as much as possible on existing frameworks, on things that had already been tested and developed by in the voluntary or regulatory frameworks. And honestly, RSB was always there at to the rescue. The first time I actually encountered the outstanding work that RSB had done was back in 2015. We were actually in a beautiful room in Brasilia, Brazil. We were actually defining how the structure of the system will be. And one of the elements there, I mean, we were actually focusing on how to tackle the difficult issue of indirect land use change emissions. And so one of the key elements there that came out of that discussion was, oh, we're going to include these ILOC emissions, indirect land use change emissions, but we also want to build on the work that has been done by RSB to mitigate that risk, so that fuel producers and airlines can actually claim that there are measures implemented to reduce the risk, minimize the risk of indirect land use change emissions, so they can get a waiver from the ILOC emissions in their emissions factors for the SAF, so they can claim more emissions reductions. That was the first time I actually came across this fabulous work from the team at RSB, and it was instrumental. But it was not the only one, of course. Then we got very quickly embarked on a very important task, which was to define the sustainability criteria and the sustainability framework more broadly, which encompasses not only what are the requirements, but how to prove compliance with the requirements and to make sure that those are properly transferred across, along the supply chain. For that, we counted with the outstanding contribution from RSB, and who had shaped not only our thinking, but also the thinking of many other stakeholders who actually also contributed. So, it's been the joint effort from many people, but I am extremely happy to have got the chance to work with, hand in hand with RSB and many others, but RSB in particular in that process. So I had the privilege, together with Thomas Roger from IATA, to co-lead that task, and we were able to, thanks to that amazing input from people like Elena, to be able to set up a list of criteria with 12 themes that I come back to where we are on that policy-wise, but we were able to come up with an agreement on the themes of and criteria and principles that apply to sustainable aviation fuels. But we also came up with the whole system that will tap on the work from RSB as a sustainability certification scheme, because what we did was an umbrella standard, like the requirements and conditions that need to be met, but the real standard owners and those who will actually make sure the certification bodies and the auditors who work for them will actually test, audit the different economic operators. That's RSB, and that's right now there's a couple of sustainability certification schemes that have been that are eligible, but we have to build all that from scratch, and it was a major milestone, I think, and that's only possible because of all the work that RSB and others had done in the past. So I'm really proud that we were able to count with RSB and the knowledge that had been, coming together for years in this group with all the different stakeholders. That which means that we had, RSB counts in as partners the whole spectrum, as Elena mentioned before, and that helped enormously to pave the road for a successful outcome. And we actually, that's something, a successful outcome is what we have to get to by the end of this year in the fall, when the ICAO Council meets again to make the final decision, hopefully the final decision, because there are things that cannot be postponed any longer on the approval of the full set of sustainability criteria. So I invite everybody who has to say on this to basically get engaged in that, talk to their ambassadors and put pressure, build pressure for that to become a reality. It is a heavily needed thing, both for the integrity and sustainability of this industry, and because even though these criteria will only be applicable beginning 2024, we need those. I mean, fuel producers and investors, they need to have regulatory certitude that what they're going to be investing in has a future-proof standard that they know that is well respected and can be, is operational and ready to go, rather than making risky investments and then ended up in a situation where things go wrong because the rules of the game has changed. For that, actually, for those who are in, but even in that situation, for those who want to have certitude that things are well done, RSB is one of those to-go places to know how the future looks like in terms of sustainability and being able to comply with the most with the highest standards. So I think I'm going to stop there. I hope that was useful and that and I let the seminar go on. And I'm looking forward to hear the different experts from RSB and learn more about the different options that you offer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pedro. It is really so encouraging to hear also from the external perspective on the impact that the RSB standards can make on jurisdictions or political fora like the ICAO process. And with that, I think we're handing over to our next agenda item. So, yes, I welcome now Aurea Nadelli, our expert on certification, to continue with the explanation on the RSB scheme for ICAO CORSIA.
Okay, thank you, Elena. It's very exciting to participate in this webinar with so many participants interested in the certification of SAF. So in this session, we will present the specific requirements of RSB standards and help you to understand how we can apply this in real world in the actual operators interested or producing materials and SAF to deliver this to the airlines. RSB schemes are based on our global standard. We have our core standard that is applicable for fuels, but also for materials, for advanced products and biomaterials. And we adapted our standard to different regulations. So RSB ICAO CORSIA is one of our standards adapted to the ICAO regulation to comply with CORSIA requirements. And we also have our standards adapted to EU RED regulation, so RED 2 currently, and RSB Japan FIT, that is a specific scheme defined by Japanese market for biomass for energy. So it's interesting that our core standards and our RSB sustainability principles and criteria are common for all schemes adapted for the regulations. So we have some specific requirements, but the most of our requirements related to chain of custody, risk assessment, and sustainability are the same. It is important for different operators being part of RSB supply chains because, for example, if you already is certified against RSB EU RED, it is easily to implement the requirements of other schemes, for example, ICAO CORSIA, and ask for an extension of scope to be certified against RSB ICAO CORSIA, or to integrate audits in some moment that you want to work with different RSB schemes. Yes, this table just complete what I just explained, that we have common requirements and it is easily to integrate the requirements, considering that operators can work in different markets or with different products. The RSB standard adapted for ICAO CORSIA is the RSB standard document 12001. This is applicable globally for operators producing, processing, and trading any type of materials in SAF supply chains. So it's applicable for biomass producers or point of origin of residuals, and also operators involved with intermediates or final products. So it is applicable globally and can cover any type of operators along the supply chain. It's important to say that RSB offers two options for certification under ICAO CORSIA. It's possible to certify SAF as a CORSIA eligible SAF. So it is based on the ICAO, the current sustainability criteria that cover the GE calculation and carbon stocks. But it's also possible, if you want to comply with the RSB full sustainability requirements, it's possible to receive the certification as RSB compliant CORSIA eligible SAF. So we offer these two options for certification, and the key difference are related to the sustainability criteria applied. And the other requirements, when we're talking about the risk management, traceability requirements, claims, rules for using the RSB trademarks, and also the audit procedures are the same. So if you apply for CORSIA eligible SAF or operators applying for RSB compliant CORSIA eligible SAF, the requirements for audits are the same. It's also important to know that RSB standards and procedures are not applicable in the same way for different type of operators along a supply chain. So we have specific requirements that are applicable for biomass producer. For example, when we have a farm producing carinata or sugarcane or corn, we have other requirements that are applicable for point of origin when the feedstock is a waste or residue. And we have industrial operators and traders that are part of the supply chain. So we can say that we have key areas covered by the standard, the sustainability, the chain of custody, and the GHG emissions. And depending on the type of operator are involved in your certificate, there are specific requirements that they shall implement, and then the auditors will check compliance considering these specific requirements. RSB is very flexible when we considering the certification scope. The scope included all the steps, operators, sites, and feedstocks and products that are involved from the start of the supply chain until the point that is done any claim about the SAF delivered to the market. So it's possible to certify, for example, the full supply chain. So operator applying for certification, they can include all the suppliers and traders or storage sites that is part of the supply chain, or it's possible to certify individual steps or different legal entities. So depends on your business model and the management system that you are in place, and also the type of contracts and arrangements that you have with your supply chain. It's possible to define the best model that fit your objectives, and then is more effective for you to implement the RSB requirements. So talking about our sustainability requirements, as I explained in the previous slides, we offer the opportunity to certify against the CORSIA eligible fuels or RSB compliance CORSIA eligible SAF. So in this case, when we are considering the CORSIA current sustainability requirements, we are talking about the conservation of carbon stocks. This requirement is covered by RSB Principle 7 in our principles and criteria, and it defined that it's not possible to use materials produced in carbon stocks areas converted after 1st January 2008. This cut-off date is the same as defined by RSB standards, and then any conversion, for example, from different land use change to other, should be considered in the GE calculation. So my colleague Carolina will explain this in her presentation just after my slides. Okay, the next one. When we are talking about the full RSB principles and criteria, and it's also an option for your SAF certification to be RSB compliant, we are talking about our holistic sustainability approach, covering legal compliance, social requirements, and other key environment requirements. For example, the RSB principles and criteria cover social aspects as local food security, rural development, land rights that are very relevant. For example, in some regions where we have issues related to land rights and also food versus fuel discussions. And also we have specific additional requirements related to water and soil and air emissions that is relevant for both biomass producers and also for industrial operators. So, and our principles and criteria are the same that we apply for our RSB schemes and regulatory adaptations. As I told you in my previous slide, some operators in the RSB supply chains are required to comply with RSB sustainability principles and criteria, and others, depending on the type of operations involved, are not required. So primary biomass producers, for example, farms or plantations, are required to comply with the RSB principles and criteria. And also industrial operators doing chemical conversion, for example, refinery or a SAF producer, are required to comply with RSB sustainability. But when you have traders or just storage sites, distributors, or mechanical operators that are industrial operators that are just doing mechanical, physical processing of materials, the RSB principles and criteria are not applicable to their operations. So it is a way that we can really consider what is relevant and then to cover the risk operations that really can impact the environment and social aspects. RSB apply a risk-based approach. So considering the RSB principles and criteria, we have a screening tool. It's a screening exercise to help operators to identify the relevant environmental social aspects for their contest, for their geographic region, or for the type of material they are producing, or for the size of operation. So based on the screening tool, it's possible to identify what is relevant, and then if you need any specific guidance, for example, for a social study or for environment impact evaluation. And we also have our risk assessment that is part of our risk management procedure, covering different risk factors, and you identify the risks that are relevant for your supply chain and take measures to manage these risks. And also it results in a risk class, and the RSB audits frequency and intensity, for example, if it's remote or on-site audits, and also the validity of your certificate is based on the risk class. So it can vary from low, medium, or high risk. Talk a little bit about the chain of custody. The chain of custody or traceability system are covered in RSB chain of custody procedure, and it's applied for all operators along the supply chain. So when we have operators with the legal ownership of materials and transferring this material for another operator, we need a kind of controls to trace material back to be sure that only sustainable aviation fuel are being transferred with the right information to ensure a correct declaration in the final of the supply chain. And we also apply our procedure for communications and claims. So we have clear rules, for example, to use the RSB logo trademarks and labels, and also the type of declarations associated with the RSB certified materials. So we can summarize the chain of custody in 3 steps, involving when you are acquiring or purchasing some certified materials, when you are handling this within your scope, for example, storing, processing, or transport, and then when you forwarding this material to your client. So for any of these 3 steps, it's necessary to identify the points of control. So where I can have records, people trained, or system in place, or procedures in place to keep the traceability when I receive this material until the point that I transfer the product or the same material to my client. So basically the chain of custody covers these 3 steps, and our procedure described what is necessary to really provide evidence of compliance with our steps. RSB allowed different models for traceability, and under RSB Eco CORSIA, it's allowed 3 models: identity preserved and product segregation. That are 2 models that required you to have physical segregation of materials, being the identity preserved, a system that required you to not mix certified materials from different suppliers. So we keep this by supplier. Product segregation requires you to physically segregate materials from certified and non-certified suppliers. And the mass balance, that is the common system applied in fuels sectors and also in other sectors, that allowed you to mix certified and non-certified materials, but have controls about the volumes that you are receiving and transferring to the next operator. So just to give you additional information about the mass balance, we can say that the mass balance is a kind of bank account where you have credits and debits, and based on the conversion factors of the process that are involved, it's possible to calculate the amount of the materials that an operator are allowed to sell as RSB products based on the inputs of certified materials received. The approach in RSB CORSIA is the same approach that we have in mass balance for RSB URED and RSB Global. So if you are familiar with this, it's also the same requirements and type of records necessary that we have for mass balance under CORSIA. A common question that we receive from operators is about how RSB accept other schemes in our chain of custody. When we are talking about ICAO CORSIA and receiving materials certified by other ICAO accredited schemes, it's possible to receive this material in RSB certified supply chains, but it's not allowed to do RSB claims to this specific material. So the claim allowed in this case is the ICAO CORSIA compliant SAF. So it's not allowed for an operator receiving material certified by other ICAO accredited schemes to use the RSB trademarks or to do specific RSB claims on the materials. In the next slides, we have diagram to illustrate it better to help you to understand. This is a full supply chain certified by RSB, so all operators involved, for example, from the farms to first collectors or gathering points, industrial operators and traders, are certified under RSB ICAO CORSIA schemes. So it's possible to do RSB claims in the SAF delivered to the market. In the other case, when we have some operators in our supply chain not certified by RSB, but by other ICAO recognized schemes, it's possible to keep the certification, but the claims allowed in the end, it's the ICAO CORSIA compliant only. It's not possible to use the RSB claims or trademark. And then finally, this table provides you a summary of the options for RSB certification. So option 1, the certification of CORSIA eligible SAF, and option 2, the certification of RSB compliant CORSIA eligible SAF. So we have these RSB sustainability requirements. The full RSB principles and criteria are applicable for RSB compliant, but not for only CORSIA eligible SAF. The GHG emissions reduction threshold are different, and Carolina, my colleague, will explain this in the next presentations. The claims and delivery document defines the type of claims allowed, and then the use of the trademark allowed for the RSB compliant CORSIA eligible SAF. So I will hand over to my colleague, Carolina, that will now talking about the GHG requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurea. And so, hi, everyone. So as Aurea explained, we have two different options for certification under CORSIA. And here we can see how RSB CORSIA was built and differs from CORSIA requirements in terms of GHG emissions reduction. So CORSIA considers a value of 89 grams of CO2 equivalents per megajoule as the fossil fuel baseline for jet fuel. So for CORSIA, a SAF producer must achieve a GHG emission reduction of at least 10% compared to the baseline, and considering both the core GHG LCA added from ILUC, induced land use change. And beside that, RSB also requires that the SAF producer reduce the core GHG LCA emission by at least 50% or 60% for new installations. Okay, and the system boundary of the core LCA must include the full supply chain of SAF production and use. And you should consider here, since the feedstock production, cultivation, process, and extraction, until the combustion of the fuel and the aircraft engine. And when a SAF supply chain presents more than one product, I mean the co-production of SAF together with green diesel or green naphtha and so on, the emission must be allocated based on their contribution to the total energy content, which must be measured using the lower heat value. And it's critical to note, and I'd like to highlight here, that the CO2 emission must not be allocated to waste, residues, and byproducts. And in addition to the core LCA, the GHG calculation must also include the induced land use change, that is an estimation of both the directly and indirectly effect of feedstock on land use. And from now on, I will refer to induced land use as ILUC, just to make it clear. And the core LCA, value can be determined either with default values provided by ICAO CORSIA or based on the calculated actual LCA values provided by operator. And however, the iLook value must be determined on the basis of default values provided by ICAO document that I will show you in the next slides. Okay, having said that, one of the common questions that we receive from companies is, how can I classify the feedstock that my company is using for SAF production, and how can I know whether the feedstock is eligible under CORSIA certification? So I bring here some clarifications to support you with these questions. The feedstock can be classified under 4 different categories. The categories will differ by the production pathway, the economic value, and supply availability. So the first one is the primary feedstock. That is the case in the feedstock is the main product. And it has an economic value and has an elastic supply. The second category is the byproduct feedstock, that it's a secondary product, but it has an economic value, but not elastic supply. It has an elastic supply. The third one is residues. So residues are defined as secondary materials with inelastic supply and little economic value. And the last one is waste, and wastes have inelastic supply and no economic value. They are substance that will be discarded. So, and as I told before in the previous slide, there are iLook default values for primary and co-product feedstock. And it's important to note that the default values for iLook for primary and co-product feedstock must be added to the ICAO document for CORSIA eligible fuels before the fuel be eligible under CORSIA. And I will show more about this table for CORSIA eligible fuels in the next slides. And the feedstocks that are considered a low risk for induced land use change can utilize a iLook value equal to 0. But the question is, how can I classify it, and how can I know if a feedstock is a low iLook risk feedstock? So waste, residues, and byproduct feedstocks have 0 emission during the production and are also assigned with iLook 0. And there is a positive list for waste, residues, and byproducts provided by ICAO that I will also show you to you. Also, feedstock that does not result in the expansion of global agriculture, or a feedstock that present high yields compared to the baseline, or feedstocks that are produced under practice to mitigate the land use change risk, could be considered low iLook risk feedstocks. And for yield increase, we can consider improvements in agriculture practice, such as intercropping, sequential cropping, and so on. And for unused or degraded land, we can consider a land that is not used for crop production from at least 5 years, or a land identified as severely degraded, such as mining areas. And I would like to highlight here that RSB team has a lot of experience with low iLook risk feedstock. And by the way, we have certified the first low iLook risk feedstock in the world, that was carinata oil crop in Uruguay. And also based on RSB principles and criteria, this certification also considers the land use for small communities for food and feed production. That is an essential point when we are classifying a land as unused or degradable. So the next one, please. This is the positive list for byproducts, waste, and residues that's provided by ICAO. It is a not exhaustive list. I mean, the ICAO Council can add materials to this list. And it's crucial to say that additional feedstock classified as byproduct, waste, or residues may be approved by ICAO before the use of operator. So this positive list is really important to know and to understand by operator, and can be found at RSB CORSIA Standard in the RSB website. And we also have another list, and please the next one, that is the table containing the default values for ILUC and core LCA. So similar to the positive list that I showed before, the new default values for ILUC must be approved by ICAO Council before used by operator. And a good news is that there is an ongoing assessment for inclusion of new default values for new regions and new feedstocks also. And you can also find this list in the RSB CORSIA Standard in the RSB website. So considering all the explanation before about the GE requirements, I bring here a simple example to make it clear and demonstrate the GE emission for two options of SAF production from alcohol to jet route using sugarcane ethanol as feedstock. And all the values are expressed in grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. And so starting here in the first line and take the two options. For the first one, we have 27 for GAG core LCA. And for the second one, we have 45 grams of CO2 for the SAF production from producer 2. So we need to add the ILUC value to these numbers, and this ILUC value should be a default value provided and published by ICAO CORSIA. And just to highlight here, I'm using fictitious numbers, okay? And then we can see the total GAG intensity for both options. So the CORSIA ILUC values for example 1 and 2 are different because we are considering different regions of production. So when we compare to CORSIA baseline, that it's 8.9, and then we compare it with the total GAG intensity, we can see how much GAG we are saving. And here we split the GAG LCA only and GAG LCA plus ILUC value. Then we can see the final percentage of GAG reduction. So for the option 1, we achieve 70% and 60% of GAG reduction. So we can say that the SAF resulted from this production process is eligible for CORSIA certification and qualified for RSB certification. However, the option 2 only met the CORSIA requirements. I mean, it reduced the GAG emission at least 10% if you considering the GAG LCA plus ILUC. But it is not eligible for RSB requirements because it didn't achieve at least 50% of GAG reduction in the core LCA. And to support operators and researchers in building strategy, evaluation production routes, and be prepared for certification, RSB has an incredible tool to GAG calculation. It is an Excel-based calculator that encompasses 3 different methodologies, one for RSB Global, one for RSB EURED, and one for RSB CORSIA. Here we can see in the right side a snapshot of the tool. its interface is very friendly and no user manual is needed. It already has notes to support the user, and it's really very simple to use. And it was built on blocks, and it's possible to navigate in the entire supply chain, such as the feedstock production or industrial process or the transportation. And at the end, you can see the results for RSB Global, eRed, and CORSIA. And the tool has already included data from EcoInvent or BioBrace, but it can be overwriting to adapt it to the process operator, to the process from the operator. And also here I'd like to say that the tool is available for free for RSB participating operators and RSB members. And please, if you have any questions about this tool or have interest in to use this tool, don't hesitate to contact us and to visit our website. We are welcome to work with you in this GHG calculation. And so, to finalizing, I would like to highlight here the main difference between the RSB CORSIA certification in terms of GHG methodology and requirements and other RSB schemes. Several companies are already familiar with eRed or RSB Global certification. So I would like to bring here the difference and support company in define and establish a strategy for sustainability and certification. Depends on the company strategy, could be interesting, for instance, to apply for more than one certification systems. So here you can see for the fossil-based line, we have 90 grams of CO2 per megajoule for RSB Global, 94 now for eRed 2, and 89 for CORSIA. RSB Global has a voluntary model for low iLUC risk feedstock, as well as CORSIA has a default values provided. eRed is still working on that, but it's not defined yet. For co-product allocations, the allocation of GHG emission in co-products, both eRed 2 and CORSIA work with energy-based allocation. And for RSB Global, the allocation can be done based on energy value or economic value. We have the same allocation for chain of custody. That is the rate of megajoules of feedstock to produce 1 megajoule of product. And regarding the target reduction, it's quite similar for all of them. We have 50% for LCA, core LCA, and 60% for new installations in RSB Global, eRed 2, and CORSIA. In eRed 2, we have also 65% for new installations after January 2021 and 70% for fuels from no biological origin. And for CORSIA, we also have a requirement at least 10% of GHG reduction considering core LCA plus induced land use change. So saying that, I'm sure you are already very interested in RSB certification. So I will now hand over to my colleague, George, that will explain to you how to get certified. So thank you.
Thanks, Carolina. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I just want to quickly run through the case for certification. So as you've already heard, we offer sustainability certification to fuel producers and users, which supports the industry to demonstrate real sustainability, ensure the consumers trust, and reduce the risks of both social and environmental issues associated with fuel production. And with the support of our key NGO partners, an RSB certification enables you to make claims that your customers can rely on. This slide showcases the players within the certification process, starting with the RSB itself, who develops and manages the standard, our accreditation body, ASI, who monitors the certification bodies and auditors, the certification bodies themselves, who employ the auditors. Currently, we work with 2 audit firms, Control Union and SCS Global, the individual auditors hired by the certification bodies, and yourselves, participating operators, who are the companies that apply for the RSB certification. Here we have 5 steps to achieving certification. So there's step 1, which is to fill in and send us the application form, which can be found on our website. This contains your basic company information and is followed by a 2-week consultation period, during which the public can comment or ask questions about your application. This is also followed by an internal due diligence process. And once completed, you're accepted, you are a participating operator with the RSB. Step 2 is to prepare for your audit, during which time you can follow our guides on achieving certification and work with your chosen certification body to put all the relevant changes in place to ensure that you meet the audit requirements. Step 3 is the audit itself. Your chosen certification body will conduct the audit using our standards to ensure compliance. Step 4, if any non-compliances are found, then the certification bodies will report these to yourself and allow you to close them out. Once all non-compliances have been closed out or a corrective action plan is in place, then you are certified and certification has been achieved. Your company is now one of the RSB's certified participating operators and can make claims that your customer and stakeholders can rely on. All the related tools and information about the certification process can be found on our website, www.rsb.org, or you can contact one of the team. I'm now going to hand over to Eleanor, who has some final words, and then we'll go on to the Q&A.
Thank you, George, and also thank you to the rest of the RSB team that you developed those slides and presented all this very informative content to the audience that we have here today. And thank you all for your attention. You see that we do have so many activities, and we invite you to join us as a certified operator, to join us in a partnership as a member, or for our support through our advisory services. And I would like also to present 2 new engagement opportunities that we offer to our RSB members, which is the policy platform that we are currently about to establish for SAF, which is an engagement opportunity for RSB members to come together and collaborate on SAF mandates with the goal to bring in more robust sustainability criteria in those frameworks. And the second engagement opportunity is a new working group on Power-to-X technologies, in which we want to review the current requirements that are currently developed under the different jurisdictions, and based from that want to embark on the development of an own RSB best practice for the sustainable production of Power-to-X fuels. So all our RSB members are cordially invited to join those 2 new engagement opportunities. If you're not RSB member, you're of course invited to join the RSB family. And with that, I would like to hand over to Hannah to take us through the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and thank you to everybody. We have had so many questions coming in, so we have about 18 minutes, and I'm going to try and get through as many of them as possible. If we do miss any, we will be sending around an email with the text of this, and we can definitely, if there's anything that's been missed, you know that you can reach out to anyone on the RSB team and we'll be very happy to help. So to kick off and not take up any more of this precious Q&A time, I'm going to ask Eleanor a question that's come in about the Fit for 55 package, where we're asked, looking at refuel regulation, do you think that the market will be allowed to work with book and claim system?
I mean, it is clear in the draft that we have received that certification certificates are currently looked at by the Commission. So I assume that this will be a possibility, at least for a certain time or for a certain period, to allow the market with that possibility. But I think crucial here is really then the specifics on how to develop such a system. And therefore, it is crucial that now the RSB embarks on those pilot certifications to really specify on what we have in our draft RSB Book and Claim manual, and to look into what needs to be further specifications to make this a really robust system. And with that, I am sure that we can also contribute to other book and claim initiatives that are currently under development. RSB's big strength, of course, is to flesh out robust auditing frameworks together with our multi-stakeholder approach to make sure they're backed by our entire stakeholder community. And we hope that we can then also contribute to this Fit for 55 package with that regard.
Thanks, Elena. And then still with Book and Claim, a question for David Mosley, who is our representative from RBP today. David, we've been asked, other than a few questions around fuel pricing, which I'm not sure you want to answer right now, but when do RBP expect the first registration of the SAF volumes in the registry?
Yeah, so we're undergoing our RSB certification at the moment. So as soon as we complete that certification, we'll be able to transact through the Book and Claim registry. So however long that takes, really, shouldn't be too long, hopefully.
Thanks, David. Okay, and then moving on to another question for Elena. I think this is a really interesting one, and it came in from Fatima, who I think sent it around to the whole team, the whole chat, about how we're presenting two different certification options, a CORSIA compliant and an RSB CORSIA compliant. So how can we differentiate those two certifications for customers?
It is really a very interesting question and also very important. So the basis for the RSB certification is the RSB Principles and Criteria for the entire supply chain to apply to those robust sustainability principles. And only when complying to those sustainability criteria, operators will be allowed to make RSB certified claims. Now, during the process of getting recognition by ICAO, we were asked to also offer, or asked by ICAO to also offer a certification that only covers the sustainability criteria as approved by ICAO. And therefore, we added this additional certification option. However, because we completely agree with you that it is crucial to have the distinction in the market, we decided that for those fuels that are only eligible with ICAO, but do not comply with the full set of RSB principles and criteria, we do not allow operators to make claims on RSB compliance, but also only claims on being ICAO compliant. So they also would not be allowed to use the trademarks of the RSB. And with that, I think a distinction between those different certification options is guaranteed. And also with that, I am convinced that we were able to meet the demand by ICAO to offer this minimum certification, but at the same time, also make sure that there is a clear distinction in the market for those fuels that are really truly sustainable.
Thanks, Elena. We've been getting a lot of questions about the how to determine or to get new default values into the ICAO list, which I'm going to ask Carolina to answer for us.
Sure, Hannah, of course. So to add new default values in the ICAO list, there is some criteria that should be followed and should be met. So the pathway that the operator is using should be certified under ASTM. The conversion process should be validated using sufficient scale and sufficient data to be designed and operated in a commercial scale. We need ICAO, of course, need sufficient data on the conversion process, both for LCA modeling, both from feedstock and conversion process, and also sufficient data from the region of interesting to feedstock production for ILUC modeling. And then the Committee on Aviation Environmental Protection, the CAPE, will determine if those criteria have been met to add this new pathway, and then will provide and will develop the default LCA values for the new pathway, and then they will request to modeling the ILUC value both in GTAP and global models, and then it will be evaluated for approval and then added to the default values list. And the request for new values could be done by ICAO member states or observer organizations or approved SCS to the CAP secretary.
Thanks, Carolina. Another question on book and claim. They're really coming in. This one probably for you, Elena, is how will the book and claim system interact with the SAF certificate system developed by WEF Clean Skies for Tomorrow?
Yeah, I think that we can contribute to that process. Same with other initiatives out there, like for example SABA. So as mentioned before, I see the big strength in the RSB to develop robust auditing frameworks and to develop the rule book on how to implement a book and claim system. So what are the relevant steps for auditing when registering SAF volumes? What are the specifications that are needed for a credible registry in terms of the type of information that is transferred, but then also looking at the retirement of credits in a registry, looking at the type of information that can be on a retirement certificate, so that the associated environmental benefits can be used by the market, and at the same time avoiding double counting, or maybe better to say ensuring that there is an additional environmental benefit through the use of such a credit. And I see, as I said, RSB's big strength in developing such a framework, and conducting those pilot audits will definitely help us to further specify those requirements. And I think that our experience and our lessons learned in those pilots can feed then into those other initiatives. And also it is definitely not RSB's core strength to operate a registry. So I assume that definitely we will partner then with an initiative to really develop a market scale registry. But for that, I think it is very important that we have this first pilot phase where we further develop the specifications from real life cases.
Thanks, Elena. And a question for David is, how do you see the market responding to the new book and claim solution?
Yeah, so we're reacting to our customers, and we've seen the request for a book and claim method of selling SAF come through, particularly in the general aviation space for quite some time now. So that's what's prompted us to develop this with RSB as a response to our customers. We hope that this first pilot being made available will increase appetite from the industry as well. I can foresee some customers who wouldn't go down the route of book and claim. I can foresee a lot of customers who would go down the route of book and claim, and we'll respond to those inquiries as and when they come through.
Thanks so much, David. Aurea, I have a question for you, and it is about the definition of primary forest, which I think comes from the ICAO CORSIA. So would you like to take that?
Yeah, okay, Hannah. Yes, it's related to the requirement of about carbon stocks that is not possible to convert primary forestry for other land use, for example, for producing biomass. Primary forestry is a type of the natural forest. We can say that a natural forest is an area that pursues the most of the characteristics of the natural ecosystem, the native area, for example, the composition of species, the structure of the forest, the ecological function. And a primary forest is a natural forest that have not been subject to any intervention or modification by human activities in the past recent years. So it still remain with their composition, carbon stocks, and diversity as a natural situation. It's a definition that is linked to RSB Principles 7.
Thanks, Aurea. Another question for you is a certification cost for RSB compliant CORSIA eligible SAF higher than for just the CORSIA eligible SAF? So that's assuming it has more stringent certification or auditing requirements.
Okay, and about certification costs, we need to think about direct cost, for example, the audit cost. Yes, I imagine that this question is about the cost of the audit, but not cost of implementation. Related to audit costs, if we included additional sustainability requirements, it is based on the time demanded from the certification body to check compliance with additional requirements. So probably the number of days allocated to the audit by the certification body will be higher than we just cover the CORSIA sustainability. So it's expected that based on the scope of the certification and the type of requirements auditors need to check compliance, it's yes, we expect to have an audit cost be higher than a more simple or less complex auditing.
Thanks, Aurea. And back to Elena, and I don't know if this is a question that we can answer right now, but do you think that RED 3 will include ILUC in the future?
I definitely hope so. I think in ICAO, it was a very important agreement that has been reached to include this modeling of ILUC values based on the globally accepted models. And in fact, it was a very thorough work and still continues to be very thorough work by the experts in the ICAO FTG group to develop those values and add further values to the list. And I think that is a very good example of how indirect or induced land use effects can be included, and to incorporate then also mechanisms on how to give low ILUC feedstocks a value, I think is a very good opportunity. So I think there is definitely opportunity for the EU to draw from those experiences.
Thanks, Elena. David, another question for you has come in, and this is really interesting about supply chain transparency. So what level of visibility would you like to see along the supply chain, sort of through the book and claim. Oh, you're on mute.
So the book and claim system relies on existing certification schemes prior to that SAF being loaded into the registry. I don't have any intention to modify those existing certification schemes for the SAF prior to loading into the registry. I think they're working well at the moment. I would perhaps pass the question as well to Elena to comment on whether there is room for, I think the question is suggesting kind of room for development or room for improvement of existing certification schemes to increase transparency of where the feedstocks come from. Obviously the current existing certification schemes do track the origin of the feedstock, but I think that's where the question is pointing.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of discussions around improved transparency, and also looking into the use of SAF, the environmental benefits of SAF coming from such book and claim systems, to avoid also double counting with other incentive mechanisms. So I think there is an appetite by stakeholders to improve also transparency. So I think it will be a very important discussion also to have during the stakeholder consultations that we will conduct.
Thanks so much, Elena and David. We've got so many coming in. So here's another question about book and claim. Due to the shortage of SAF supply in the world, what's actually the purpose of the book and claim, since airlines can't buy enough SAF to comply with CORSIA?
Yeah, so again, for us, it's about widening access to some customers who are perhaps not near to the current SAF production. We have customer requests from every corner of the world, to be honest, and there are some of those requests which are for relatively small volumes that would fit within a demand footprint, but because they are particularly far away or hard to get to, or at locations where perhaps even the technical discharge of the SAF at that location might be tricky. So we see this as widening access to those customers who perhaps couldn't reach a physical delivery in the first place.
Thanks so much, David. And with that, we've hit the end of our 90 minutes. I realize that there are quite a few unanswered questions. We're going to do our best to get those all answered and through to you as soon as possible. Yeah, thank you very much to everyone who's participated, either by joining in and listening along, and to everyone who's been involved in putting the webinar together, particularly Pedro and David. Thank you both so much for your time and coming along today. And I will put into the chat now some email addresses, or they're already on the screen here. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to send them through to us. Thank you.
Thank you all, and bye. See you soon.